The opinions expressed in this program are not those of CISA 7 or Time Warner Cable.
Today and understanding that this would be a benefit to their students, even upper level students, and provided me with some new ideas to process within that trimester schedule. Did you want to know more from that point of view, from the parent point of view, than what I've given you in the board report or from what I just explained at this time? I guess I don't want to just jump ahead of the process. No questions?
Well,
in the meetings that we've had, is more of the concerns with the parents that we've had, more of the concerns were with the upper level students, with AP students. These two parents, set of parents, have very high functioning students, high individual students. One of the parents we've had, now we're on the third child, we'll have the fourth child soon, and some of those students had special particular issues themselves in planning and scheduling, and we've been able to provide a plan and schedule for those students within the 2 semester courses that we have now, and then we indicated to those parents that in a trimester course that students could expand, and that we could have more students expand and possibly get to having a Calc 2 offered at East High School. And so it took them a while to kind of process, think through, and the one returned and says, I do think AP classes would have instructional time before the AP, they need instructional time before the AP courses, that they could be set up in trimester 1 and 2, and some of those trimesters or classes could be set up in trimester 2 and 3 and still be successful for our students, and that an increase in students taking AP would be there. Some of the thoughts she gave was for music, and I didn't think of this as I was going through some processes, which I'm glad that I've talked to the parents, that a student could actually take one of the trimesters off in music. And the point is that that person possibly taking off that trimester might be first chair and has always been first chair since 9th grade. And that would give an opportunity of leadership to someone else to take first chair for that trimester, where that opportunity might not have occurred. So they were also looking at other individuals within that. The other parent said, that I'm going to have to trust you and trust in what you're saying, but I'm going to still dig into some details and actually follow up and look at information myself. So I've also provided that parent with all the schools that were near us that have the trimester, so that they can look and reference those things themselves and ask the questions. Other things there?
Anything else on? I have a question. There was a survey that was out?
Correct. There was a survey that we did with our parents prior to school starting. In summer, we had talked about the trimester itself, and prior, we were wanting to get a pulse on the parents. The survey itself was not in-depth. It was more of asking if they knew about a block schedule, trimester schedule, some pieces. That survey is on the board presentation, which would be the Appendix E. And that survey was there. We haven't done more than that because we wouldn't want to have anxiety with our parents if we weren't going further. And now we've set up actually 3 meetings. Lori Blakesley has helped me set up 3 parent meetings and indicated meetings so that we could present some of that information to them and then take their questions and concerns at that time and try to answer those. And so we were actually beginning to set up the PowerPoints for that today. Anything else for the parents?
Michelle?
I think just for background knowledge, the discussion around this schedule has been going on for years, and, I think not everybody is aware of that who might be watching and listening,
Okay.
that this has been a really deep dive and really reflective practice, working with principals and practitioners who are experts in the field, site visits and so forth, as well as surveys of staff and students, I'm assuming?
Correct.
As well?
Correct.
And parents and community, so I think that's part of, do you do any with just the community or any feedback on that?
We had not gotten to the greater community itself as we were going through, because it certainly got stalled at a level with the changes.
Yeah.
But this process of looking at schedule changes has actually been going on since about 2010. And looking at the process of how do we allow for students to be able to accelerate on their own, but also look at interventions and so forth. So the first stages of what we were looking at, and I was part of that programming, was with Michael Reddig, and we were actually looking at the feasibility of having homeroom placed in the day or having an enrichment hour. Because we were looking at how do we help students either through homeroom to engage within the school to keep them connected, looking at an intervention enrichment because we're looking at the reading scores and the math scores. And that developed into looking at many different areas of scheduling. So the true 8-period day schedule that we have, which is not really a true 8-period day, because at 8-period day, every kid would take 8 periods. We're looking really at a 7, but it looks like an 8. We looked at a 4x4 block, a 3x5 trimester block. We looked at mods. We looked at a variety of pieces. And then in the eventual end of about 3 years of knowledge with not just administration, but with academic staff members within the schools, I came down to seeing the 3x5 was the most beneficial without actually having a separate homeroom intervention hour or enrichment hour. That within a 3x5 in that capacity, we could do all of those things for all of our students throughout, from the highest level to our lower level learners as we're going through. So that's where that really began. And about 2 years ago, when there was a change in administrative levels, it stalled. It stalled at a place. It hadn't stalled with us at East High School. We continued to look at it and process it. And then over this past year, then we were asked to look at how we could make some changes within our building. We kept coming back to this and kept asking to see if we could do a schedule change, and a possible schedule change to actually influence the effect of having intervention or enrichment for our students, and this is what would come about. Does that kind of help bring that process in?
I think so.
So what we've been doing though is, over the past week and so forth, we actually met with the Inner City Student Council. We've given them some information about what we were looking at East High School, and I think we answered most of your questions. We took up double the time that we were given. And then I was actually able to then, myself and my administrative staff was actually able to meet with our student council and speak with our own student council. We took a very quick survey. I think we had one student that said they would possibly leave, and the rest of the students were in favor of trying this trimester to actually benefit themselves. They asked some very respectful questions and gave us some new ideas and different possibilities that we could create within the schedule itself. So that was over the last 2 weeks. And then we began to meet with parents, and we've been meeting with staff either through email or through personal meetings with them in our offices and so forth.
I was just going to say that when I first met with Lori and was asking some of what I would view as the tougher questions related to the change, I was really impressed with the amount of documentation and work she had put together for putting together the answers to those questions for staff, and she was prepared for the community at large as well as parents. I think that she wanted to first make sure there was at least approval from the board to consider moving forward with exploration of this before it could go any further. We wanted to make sure that before we were
Are you, I've got a loud microphone. Can I jump to a different topic? That's still the schedule. I was talking about I just have some questions about the schedule itself.
Sure.
And last time when you presented this to us, you talked about having skinnies in between. So I'm wondering, when you look at, on page 5, I think it is, when you have the schedule blocked out like that, within what's blocked out here, how do the skinnies fit in those
The skinnies would
schedules?
fit more as a day one, day two. It'd be very difficult to
okay.
split a 75-minute
Yeah, that's what I
period to have
wondered.
enough learning environment within that process.
Okay.
Skinnies are typically used in a 4x4 right now, because a 4x4 block schedule has 90-minute periods, so they're able then to skinny, so they do 45 minutes for the entire year for those courses that need to be skinnied. Typically, that's included because they can't fit into the schedule in a
Yeah.
4x4.
Okay, so when you use that term, you're meaning every other day?
Correct.
Day-
That's what we would
day
look
one,
for,
day
is an
two
every other
schedule.
day.
Okay.
So a day one, day two, to have what you would consider a skinny in a 4x4. So day one, day two, we've been working with individuals to work out that process. So we've been working with music. Music is usually the one that's the little needs touch all year through. So we've been working with Karen Eichen in the music department, and we've actually worked with Alicia Hanold, who teaches our music theory, and she thought it would be a wonderful commitment to have day one, day two, so say band or orchestra day one, but have music theory day two. So they're actually using their music and music theory at the same time, and they can actually blend and probably have a deeper experience within the music theory, so that when they take their music theory tests, they'll be prepared and have that understanding in May. So that's where the skinnies would be. Does that help?
And then you mentioned at the last time about having, for the AP classes, that the bulk of the class, the whole traditional class, the AP class would be finished in 2 trimesters.
2 trimesters, correct.
And then with an opportunity for taking a third, would that be a skinny or because it seems like that might lend itself more to a skinny.
That would probably relate to a skinny, so a lot of your students that are at upper level would probably relate to a skinny as you're going through. So what we've been working with is the AP structure is, you'd have to look at calculus. When I taught calculus, I could never finish things quick. By the first Tuesday of May, I couldn't get everything in, or I'm rushing to get it in, and there's no opportunity to prepare students for that test. So calculus would have to be trimester 1, trimester 2, which ends in March, well, beginning of May, so you're only looking at about 30 days within that difference. So a student could take a preparation course for that, and it could be a day 1, day 2, so that every other day they would be preparing for it, and they could take another course on top of that. Yep.
So for that preparation course, would it be for all of their APs, like if they're in multiple APs, or just one class?
It could be, and again, we haven't made that determination yet. We'd have to work with the students and the teachers themselves as we're going into that. But it would certainly, when I talk to our statistics person, stats doesn't need trimester 1, trimester 2. There's not as much material that they need. So our statistics AP stats person said if I did trimester 2 and 3, I'd have the students prepared and ready to go for the stats AP test at that point in time. So again, it would all depend on that process with the AP teachers.
Okay.
Now, our chemistry teacher we've talked to can't complete everything within the structure that's there. Would love to see an extension of another semester to chemistry to actually get deeper into the chemistry field that he's not able to get to at this point in time.
So would it be possible for a class to run, like an AP class, or any class to run all 3 trimesters?
Dependent on the curriculum, yes. But again, it would be dependent on students' choice, too. And that would be the bigger piece to it. The students would have to make that choice and make that process.
Okay.
Andrew?
So how would, you say students would have to make the choice, but students would need to know before, I mean, we're not going to have, I would assume, we wouldn't have, even if we wanted to, enough interest to run one AP where you get it in 2 semesters, then have optional study meetings versus a different one where it's a full semester and then skinny in second and skinny in third. So when you say the students have to make the choice.
Well, they would make the choice just like they do now. Okay, their choices are made in December and January as they're going into,
Right.
so the staffing part is there. Right now, I have to look at staffing, and the determination of a course could be based on that there's less than 14 students, so that course doesn't run. My hope is that the district allows us an FTE balance, and that we have the ability to run courses that maybe have 10 students based on the FTE allotment that's given to East High School, and that we hope to honor the choices that our students have in that process. We've had a lot of that choice already with our executive directors, that we've been able to run courses that might not have high numbers, because we've effectively changed some other courses and had more students in other courses, and so we've been dependent on that. Our feel is that if we have these pieces together as a process, it's not going to be done the first year. Second or third year, you're going to start seeing kids choose more higher level courses, and that we can offer more higher level courses as we're going forward.
But I guess what I'm wondering is when would a decision be made as to whether, we had some discussion about some of the music, or at least some of the higher level music, performing music classes might be a full semester 1 and then every other in both trimester 2 and 3. So that makes sense, and it seems like that's something that's likely to go in that way. When would the decisions be happening on these, for some of these classes where it seems like it might be kind of up in the air with some of this AP stuff as to whether it would be over parts of 3 semesters or whether it would be completed in 2 with optional additional review stuff?
Another way to think about it is the block schedule is a little more efficient than the traditional schedule, and so we would have to allow East High School to potentially use some of that efficiency to build in the possibility for different kinds of offerings. It would be dependent on a couple of factors. Number one, we'd have to know what the students are interested in, but also based on the way the schedule actually gets built, we don't want to have any fractions of staff or anything like that where people are left without a teaching assignment. And so they're going to have a little extra FTE to use in these first few years to figure out those questions. And so usually, typically in February, we sit down and we go through those staffing pieces based on student requests. Lori would have to do a little differently this year, in the next couple of years potentially, and stick with the staff that she has and then make that work based on what students are interested in.
And then typically by mid-April, Andrew, we really have our schedule done, completed, and then our student services is working on that model. So within April, May, we would have that understanding of how it would run for the following year.
Right, but before April or May, right, you would need to have students' course selections. So I guess it still leaves me wondering whether or not a student's going to choose a class may or may not depend on whether it covers parts of 3 trimesters or 2, for both reasons. They might feel comfortable only if it extends into 3, or they might feel that other things will fit only if it's contained entirely within 2, or would they be signing up for courses and then knowing that they're signing up for courses during the year, but not necessarily when they'll get them, and then they might find out that it takes place over?
Right now, as our curriculum is, we wouldn't be able to do it over 3. It would have to be a change in curriculum to do more. So our person would be looking at doing, if chemistry, he would be finished in the first 2 trimesters with what he does now.
Okay.
What he's saying is he doesn't get as deep into the AP knowledge base as he should for the students to be more successful on the AP test.
Okay, so we're not talking about anything except maybe some of those music ones we discussed
Correct.
previously.
Those would be the ones that would go over that, but then we'd be talking with the students, individually as they're going into scheduling, And so then we would prepare them. Right now, what we have is we have students come in and we say, hey, you're taking this many AP courses, you might want a study hall. So what we would talk to them about is, if we're going into this process, is you have this many AP courses, we might want to have this work session for AP within trimester number 3. Would you be agreeable to that? And then we would take numbers on that process as we're going, almost like a resource for those students. So we'd have to anticipate that ahead of time as we're going through. And that would be our pieces. But beyond that, our teachers, as they develop a trimester type educational system as they're moving, they could also look at some of these AP courses that, chemistry doesn't get as the depth that it actually needs, the AP chemistry course. You could ask our chemistry teacher that he tries, but there's not enough time to do all those things. So the more depth he can possibly give these students, but then that could be an elective piece too to the students. So if students are accelerating themselves in any field, so they could accelerate themselves in science, they could take extra courses. But again, that would be after the fact.
Okay, so as it stands right now with...
We'd have to follow our curriculum as we have it.
It'd be a 2 trimester, which would have, and for these APs, because there's an exam, would have to be first and second. But then maybe that 3rd trimester piece could be a study hall or a half study hall, but maybe geared with some staffing assignments towards extra help, test prep, that kind of thing?
Correct.
Okay.
You mentioned this last time about how once this gets rolling, a lot of the work will be in terms of professional development for teachers, in terms of how you teach within a 90-minute block versus a 70, or no, other way around, sorry.
75-minute block.
And I noticed on the survey from the teachers that was a lot of their concerns, was how do I do that? So what is your, and you probably don't have all the details to this, but if you could just give me a general sense of what your plan is in terms of how to help teachers know what those strategies are for filling the 75-minute block.
Okay, so what we've been doing is we've been looking at all the other school districts as we're going through, and we've been surveying. So the one survey that we've just provided for last week was a survey on what type of professional learning would teachers need. So we look at the remaining professional development for this school year, which are all the early releases, and on each one of those early releases, we would provide the needs for our teachers. So one of the questions that we had was a change process. So we have all these questions, and we have our teachers, for professional learning, how important is it to include increasing guided practice opportunities in a classroom? 78.1% of our teachers agreed with that as a 3 or 4. So there's a variety of pieces that we're already asking, and we would incorporate within the remaining facets of our professional learning for the remaining part of the year. If this weren't to go, we would look at something else for the professional learning. We're also looking at having professional learning within the summer so that we can bring in our CLT groups that we have already, so the independent department groups at different times, so they could work together in a process of 3 days so that they could create their guiding changes within their classroom, and then incorporate professional learning within the school year itself as we're going. We're still going to look at having the common planning time for the teachers that are still teaching the same course. So it's been our objective that when we plan our schedule now, that every teacher that has 9th or 10th grade classes, that they have a common period off to schedule, to plan, and to work with one another throughout the day. And we've been able to do that for the last 2 years. So it's still our goal that within this process of a trimester, that teachers, if they taught geometry, that they would have a common planning hour off, a 75-minute period off in one of those trimesters, so that they could work together and still facilitate that learning and that process. What we did find is that throughout this process, we even asked the teachers to get a pulse on what their feelings are. And the pieces that we had is the trimester schedule will provide many more learning opportunities for our students, and I'm excited to start. 18.4% of the teachers had that. Trimester schedule will provide many more learning opportunities for our students. I'm supportive, but nervous. That was 28.7% of our teachers. I have no strong feelings one way or the other. okay? And that was 23% of our teachers. And at this point in time, we have 29.9% that I don't believe the trimester schedule will work one way or the other. And they're respectively opposed to it, which we can honor that. So if you're looking at this, we've got 70% of our teachers, but again, the knowledge base of what a trimester is, the change element, I think, is part of the process. We haven't had enough time to be able to work with our teachers to independently provide them all the support necessary. We'd like to do this survey again later on after professional development and then see what our values are at that point.
A follow-up to that. One of the things that will change is the pacing of the course. I'm assuming teaching and learning will be, and your team, Mike Freeze and his team, the curriculum folks, will be revamping that curriculum and changing the pacing, which will certainly help with your professional development to understand what happens when. I mean, I think that that's really one of the key elements of then understanding what I need after that as a teacher too. And that was, experience I've seen, and I think that those pacing guides will really help understand what content is delivered and how fast, how slow, and then knowing exactly what other resources you would need as well for as you spoke to, enrichment or interventions.
Agreed, and some of that work has been started already, at least the preliminary meetings and contacts to make sure that it was underway as needed. So we're ready to take on that work. I think that preparation is incredibly important. You're absolutely right. Having been a teacher and an administrator in a block schedule, it all comes down to professional preparedness to teach in that system. The teaching and learning, I think, becomes of higher quality because to stay engaged for a longer period of time requires engaging teaching, which we already have a lot of great engaging teaching at East, but this will offer an opportunity for even further enhancement.
On page 7, you talk about traveling students, and there's an asterisk that says if a student is doing only a single semester travel, it would be scheduled during the first or third trimester. But I'm wondering, they're traveling to another school, right? So if that other school is on semesters, how do they have to travel part of their second trimester and have to go to this other school too? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
If I'm not mistaken, this would be coming to East, is my understanding would be the asterisk there, would be coming to East.
Okay.
Because if they're only going to take anatomy and physiology, they only need the 2 semesters.
Right.
So there's a trimester in that. Typically, what happens with our students that are traveling for anatomy and physiology, they're also taking med term. So they would have less travel time in their day, one semester or the other beyond that. Students that would travel to another school, then, they would have that break, they would have that process, but they would still be able to come back into the building with less time and still pick up hours 2 through 5. Or on the opposite end where they take hours 1 through 4.
Except if they're traveling, say, East student travels to, I don't know what class, travels to Southwest for their blueprint reading.
Right.
And they're on the semester schedule. So somehow they'd have to be able to start in the end of January and be able to go. So that's going to have to be finagled somehow in their schedule.
And that would be, right, we'd have to work with Southwest to make sure that their courses, just like we do now with scheduling, to make sure those courses and the traveling students have the least effect on their time. But then again, we would have to look at a student like that possibly has maybe a study hall at that. We're trying, you try not to have as many study halls as you have right now, which is ineffective time that a lot of our kids have, or otherwise that a study hall is basically intervention completely, and they don't have a study hall. So we would work those pieces out, but typically when a student does that, it's been for the full year, so then it doesn't have any effect. So they typically don't take just a semester course.
Okay.
The only one that they do is, like I said, anatomy and physiology is a full year course, and med term is one semester. And then, so that student from Preble would have to take 2 hours off one semester, but 3 hours off
Right,
the following, one of the semesters from their school.
okay, all right,
Correct.
thanks.
Where in this term, they would only take 2 off from their school for the whole year.
Could you just give a brief highlight of maybe 1 or 2 new questions you got when you met with the student council, or new ideas that you explored from that?
When we met with the student council, a lot of their interest was more on AP and making sure that you could fulfill the AP courses. They really didn't give us many new pieces to the puzzle, as we had talked about. They were interested more in the world languages and how that had an effect on if there was a break, and we talked about that process. The deeper learning that you have within the classroom should allow that to stay longer as a process. So I take my own family, my own kids who are in that 4x4 block, and look at the Spanish. My daughter actually had deeper Spanish learning in the 90-minute block than she would have ever had in the day-by-day block facility, to the extent that, okay, great, she's got a minor in Spanish coming, as per se. Yelled at my own son because he, at the end of his, at the end of his sophomore year, he had already finished Algebra 2. So he had geometry and Algebra 2, and he looked at me and he said, "There's no way that I'm taking math again," because I got my 3 credits. I said, "No, you're taking math." So he had to take pre-calc, and he's in calc now, so he's still crying to mom. But I'm looking at students that come in that are geometry students as 9th graders. They could take geometry and Algebra 2 and possibly get to pre-calc by the end of their sophomore year, so they could actually take Calc AB and Calc BC at the school. They could really advance their learning. Other students that we have is we're looking at how do we get more Spanish 5, French 5, and we're having difficulties because they have to pick and choose as they come in as 9th graders. We feel that we can extend that and actually move to have more students there. With the parents are giving us things of maybe having a course that's an ACT prep. One of them was, how about an AC prep, a .5 credit course that would work on that? A student that's taking lots of AP courses, they could take the ACT in June, and they could actually be prepared for that. Another thought, intensive writing. Is there a time that they have offered an intensive writing course to actually help students with their essays to college, or to help them with their scholarships? We look at the CEP courses that we have from NWTC and how they would actually fit a more appropriate piece right now, because most of our NWTC courses need more time in a semester, so we have to double block a student so they actually lose another elective. But if they can take the 75-minute courses, it would actually fit and have more of, it would have a better alignment with NWTC, because NWTC is changing their courses and their curriculum. And the first aspect of it right now is actually our City Stadium Automotive. They're already changing it according to what they're going to change at the university, but they're starting with us, and they're processing that. So we were looking at those pieces and how can we have an effect on that. There's concerns, which were brought up. I guess the bigger concerns were, looking at a full course and changing teachers. We already do that. So we take an algebra course, a student might have me first semester and might have Tom the second semester. They're already changing. We're doing that change to effectively help students get every course that they ask for. And that's the best way and method that we can do that with. So the question is the full-year course, is it really a full-year course, or is it a semesterized course that actually the academics and the standards have to be met and then moved on to the next one? We look at students that aren't successful in that course, in that semester course, they have to wait a full year to retake it. Well, they could possibly go into that same course again, trimester 2, and retake it right away. So that impact instead of waiting, that's where we would have it. There are some questions by our staff about the teaching minutes and the planning minutes, and that's an HR question that has to be answered. We've effectively given you as much as we can show you on the board report. Again, that's something that we'd have to work with our HR department on as we're going. The question I did get tonight, and which would be a question that I would have too, is if we're doing this process, what data would we be continuing to look for? What would you want to see for this process to continue? So the question is if we make this change, if things stay the same, right, we don't have student growth or anything like that, that's the questions that are coming, what would you really be looking for the quantitative or qualitative data that the school board would want to see to continue this process?
You want answers now?
I don't know if we have time because, there's a football game tonight, right, Brenda?
I mean, aside from graduation rate, ACT scores, things that we already follow, one of the things I would be interested in is your passage, the course passage rate. So in other words, just, following through to see, of the students that maybe fail their first trimester math class and then take it the second trimester, what's their success rate for the rest of the year? Those kinds of things to sort of help us understand, because the ACT and graduation rates are sort of those high-level numbers, but just to kind of give us a sense of what the, what the individual impact on students is. And I think for me, that would be one indication that would help me know.
It would be a leading indicator.
Right.
Chris?
Well, there are several more. I didn't know you'd ask this question tonight. Behavior, attendance, graduation rate mentioned, a larger percentage of youngsters going on to post-secondary education. But that sort of begs the question, because I believe I asked you last time to try to find out from other districts in our state, what were they seeing to say that this is a better way to go than our current schedule? What are they actually seeing other than anecdotal comments here and there? Granted, it all sounds very good, and I appreciate that, but we should have a long enough track record in the state by the district on some of these items you're asking us for right now that you should be able to go and find, because this is going to be a disruption with a lot of things. To go to this model, we just want to make sure the juice is worth the squeeze. Secondly, I had asked before to work with whomever downtown, John, his department, or Mrs. Marsh and her department, what is this going to cost us? We do have a fiduciary responsibility. If it's going to cost us about the same, a lot more or less, I think we need to know what that is. So those are a couple concerns I still have with it. I appreciate what you have here, make no mistake about that, but I still would like to see some answers to those things. Oh, one more thing before we go any further, if you would. We do have being taped and the public sees this. Would you mind quickly defining 3x5 and a skinny, just in general terms for our audience?
You just want the 3x5 as a one?
I want people that are watching this to know what we're talking about.
Well, a 3x5 trimester would be that there are 3 semesters of academics with 5 periods per day. So that's why it's considered a 3x5. So students have the ability of taking 7.5 credits in a school year rather than 7, a maximum of 7. Where a 4x4 structure is 4 semesters of academics, but then 90-minute classes as they're going through, where these would be 75-minute classes. The structure that we placed is a structure that wouldn't have any impact on transportation and have no impact on all the other schools that would be around if there was no changes or impact on our traveling teachers or traveling staff. The reason I've asked that question is because if we, and you're correct, in going to this process, if it's a big change, we don't want to go and then 2 years later go, oh, forget it, go back. So that's the concerns that the teachers have, and that's what they've asked, is what are we truly looking for? We can always get this quantitative data, but is there some qualitative data that you want to see processed? Because I'm looking at some of the stuff from Aldo already, because they've made that change and that adaptation, and I've already seen that there's some positive pieces to their schedule change that they've had, and students saying classes are longer and we get more done and more study time. get more help from my teachers, more time to take important tests and assessments. So they're processing already at the middle school and seeing that there's an advantage. So that's why this staff member asked that question, and I wanted to make sure that we have most of this on there. What we're looking at is a neutral cost to this process as we're moving. The only cost that we're looking at right now, and they can anticipate, would be the professional learning in summer that we'd be looking for. Other than that, we don't foresee any other costs affected by that. And then we've been working with Tom and John, and I don't see a cost change in it. There's no cost change in transportation. In fact, I talked to Jeremy today, there possibly could be a reduction in the transportation cost, because if we match our elementary school calendars, because the calendar is not complete, but if we match the elementary, there'd be less movement on us on days, and there wouldn't be there'd be less transportation from East High School and around. So there could be a reduction in that part of it. But we're not looking at any reduction in staffing, those types of things. We're looking at staying neutral as a process.
Rhonda? You may have covered this, and I apologize, but I'm very new, obviously. Where is the nearest community high school that's actually actively doing this?
Right now, West De Pere is. I know Denmark has a 4x4 schedule with Skinnies. Skinnies they're taking their 90-minute periods and making 2 periods out of them for the full year. Our Skinnies would be considered a day 1, day 2. So in a trimester 1, trimester 2, you'd have a day 1, day 2. And you'd process that for the rest. Kakana just changed to a trimester 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2014. Kiwani has a trimester, but I think theirs is a bit changed. I don't think it's a true trimester. Everybody tries to have a true trimester, but it gets mixed. Kimberly, nothing other than that. Kimberly, I believe, has a 4x4 block. So there's schools around here that have a 4x4 block, and those are the ones we visited and had information. Those are the ones I informed my parents of, and those are the ones that my parents are going to go right to the school and ask questions, and I told them, yes, please go there. And that's where some of our staff members have been asking the same, and we've been connecting our staff members as much as possible. If we know of an individual that works in a trimester school in a certain subject, we've been connecting them through email so that they can have that communication and speak with them about what are the positives, what are the negatives about things as they're going. It's not going to be completely positive. We'll be honest about that. There are some glitches in there. If there was, like I said, if there was a perfect schedule, everybody would be on it, and I might be retired by then, right? So I would write a book, but that's where we're at. So that would be the closest for you.
Thank you.
Chris?
Just a clarifying question again for the audience. By trimester, it's not like you go into summer, it's the same calendar year.
Correct, it's the same school year. It's the same school year, it just is in basically approximately 60 days. And when you look at a school, you have to run 180 days in your schedule approximately. So each 60 days would be a new trimester. You would look for your breaks to be around those times that there would be natural breaks in the calendar as we're going. What we would look for would be like still having professional development days, but doing it more like our AM professional development days, and then the afternoon into night would be our conferences with our teachers. So they would have 3 times during the year that way, so that we wouldn't completely eliminate that. What we would try to eliminate are these early release days that are very confusing or disruptive at times, and then eliminate the possibility of having our elementary schools off at the same time the high schools are on, because that is our highest absenteeism dates, because our students at the high school are actually watching their younger siblings. So we're actually having some effects there. So we're hoping to engage the kids more often within the school and keep them going and keep their focus on education, and that when there's times off, then they have actual off. So we look at the second trimester. The second trimester would still have the breaks of our winter recess and so forth. Would have extra days because of the winter weather. But we'd look at having the trimester end and then the following week be the spring break, so kids could actually have a spring break without having to do an essay paper over the spring break and wherever they're going. And that when they come back, they would have a start to a new semester.
Trimester.
Or trimester, excuse me. Well, which would be, which is a semester, yeah, which is in their part of the semester.
Right.
Correct. So that's what we would be looking to. And because the calendar is not completed yet, that's why we would come forward to the board and look for that information. Because making a calendar that East would be on a different schedule than anyone else, that doesn't benefit anybody in our
No,
district.
that's not.
So we want to be very cognizant of that.
Good.
But our elementary is on a trimester already.
Are there any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Michelle.
I just want to make sure that as part of the planning, as you move forward, you do have an evaluation plan, and I know you asked the governance question of what the governance wishes to see, but I think it's also where does it fit with your school improvement plan and how will you hold yourselves accountable so that you'll be able to report out to parents as well and students and community. So just keeping that in mind. I'm sure that the assessment and evaluation folks sitting in the back have taken copious notes, but I just want to make sure that's also part of the planning moving forward. Okay, thank you.
Gwen's taking notes, right?
A lot of work.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. Anything else that you have?
And why don't you introduce the team who has graciously come?
My gracious team. Oh, now I have to turn around. So, and the administrative team, we have Kurt Julian, Lisa Lipp, Joseph Brooker. Then on the planning team that we've had, that we've actually been working with this, is Karen Eichen, music teacher. Linda Bornbach, who is our ELL teacher. And then we also have then teachers here. So we have Brad Reister, who's our math teacher, who is also GBA representative. Calendar. Yeah, Joyce Gillespie, who is a science teacher, Brianna Kehoe, science teacher, and Ruth Birkin, science teacher. Am I missing anybody? Yeah, I think I've got it all.
Thank you.
That's pretty good for a mathematician to remember everybody's name.
That is
Very inclusive team.
If there are any other questions or anything, as I said, I've worked with Lori Blakesley. We've also got a plan out to meet with parents. You're more than welcome to come to those parent meetings. I believe the first one is this Thursday. So we're going to introduce most of this. We're trying to provide the information that we can to our parents and look for their concerns and so forth. So that would be 6 o'clock, I believe, on Thursday at the East Cafeteria. Since we still have the musical going, they have practice. And I'm going to put a little plug in for that, too. Don't forget to come to the chorus line. And then Monday, I believe we have an early morning meeting, and then we have an afternoon meeting scheduled within the next 2 weeks. But we'll continue to survey our students and our staff and so forth.
Chris? When may I expect an answer back on my question?
On the question of the cost? Or the question of
the cost, relative to the research? I assume John can verify that. But in terms of what is there in other districts to say this is a better way to go than the current set?
Right, and that research is in Appendix F. Most of the research that we found, as we found that they went further and further away from that, the research on their websites was minimal. When we went back to West De Pere, because they started in 2003, I've looked for all their information. What I can find is that they've improved their AP scores and they've improved their AP enrollment, but I haven't had anything else from before, because before is when they had that. And what you see in Kiwani is you see their evidence of where they've exceeded their expectations from 2014. Homestead had moved to the high school to trimester in 2012. That's on there. They've rated significantly exceeds their expectations. I have a question and answer piece that can be clicked up on, which will give you those pieces. I'd rather have you have availability to go to their website. It's pretty easy to see and look at those pieces. Adams Friendship, when I went onto their website, they didn't have any of those pieces. And then the Kaukauna High School just created those desirable effects and so forth. And then you see Dallastown, which is in another school district, they have those things. The time to contact those school districts themselves individually, we haven't had that time. We need more time to be able to do that, to get a bigger load or a bigger fill from what we can find on the websites themselves.
Thank you. I haven't had this to go over. I appreciate what you're telling me and sharing that with our public. The one other little piece, and maybe you know the answer now, I'm concerned about mental health, and with this type of structure, at least in my mind, theoretically, it could be helpful to youngsters who have mental health issues and anxiety. I don't know whether that's something you've spotted out there from other school districts going under this model or not.
I don't know if those statistics would be there. That's just going to be a qualitative question, because when we actually went to West De Pere, I was one that went to West De Pere. One of my counselors went, we went to Kaukauna. We just asked the students individually, multiple students that we asked them how they felt from going from a regular semester schedule to a trimester. They felt more comfortable. They felt less anxiety. They felt like they could learn deeper. We were in Kaukauna the very year they changed, and we were there for a conference, and students within that conference, we surveyed, we asked them questions and so forth, and that's what we were provided at that time. I don't know if distinctly a district's going to have that possibility, but I'll certainly look into it, probably with Vicki, with your help. I'm not sure if those records are as available as what we would say because of the confidentiality of that process. But qualitatively, I can tell you that asking students and asking staff members, they felt more comfortable, less anxiety, less stress as they were going through their days. They didn't have that short choppiness within the process.
Thank you.
I think there is specific research that shows that the more meaningful relationships you have with people, the greater the sense of belonging, and the greater the sense of belonging, the better mental health effects. So many of the districts that have had a longer period of time, provided that the relationship is good, once there is more time with that teacher, that there's a closer bond and less anxiety.
One of the links in your presentation I couldn't get to upload. I got it under resources used, you have school improvement using 3x5, the trimesters, and then the research brief didn't upload. I don't know if you could send us, you could send it to Lori or Sandy, and she could get it out to us.
That's interesting.
I think Sandy's the research brief, trimester schedule, it's called.
On page 20?
We tried them all.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I did it on my computer at home, and I tried it here, and either way, both times it didn't work. It doesn't, I can't even highlight it.
No, it doesn't highlight.
It doesn't have
Well, this one's working on this one, so.
You can send that individually.
You want me to send it individually too?
or you could get it to Sandy and she can send it to us
Or did yours?
separately.
Okay. Yeah, because we were trying every one of them as we were going through, so.
Anything else? Thank you very much, very informative.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you for taking the time to be here this evening. What's that? That's right. All right, we will move on with the 400 series policies. And Melissa, I think you're going to be... First one, student conduct policy and classroom code of conduct rule.
Between the two.
Vicki and I will co-present tonight on the 400 series policies. We had an opportunity to review the policies with you in the context of our retreat on student discipline and the data regarding student discipline. As we indicated in that meeting, the 400 series policies are grounded in the multi-level student support. Did I get that right?
Close.
Okay,
Systems of support.
Systems of support, thank you, MLSS, as it's better known. And the policies have been revised to align with the MLSS document, as well as been revised to reflect our current practices and best practices across the district. So you have in front of you the current policies and then the proposed policies and rules as revised. And we can go through them one by one. Would that be most appropriate for the board? Okay, so the first policy we're going to look at is Policy 443, Student Conduct, and Rule 443, Student Conduct. And for the viewing audience, in large part, the policies include much of the language that is included in the existing policy. They've been revised to reflect our format that we're moving to for policies to provide better clarity and transparency for our parents and staff as we work through those policies. So you'll see the purpose, which the board has asked us to include to align that purpose to the district's mission and vision. And then any definitions that are used throughout that policy to be consistent in definitions across all of our policies in the district. And then the implementation and any other administrative or guidance in that policy. And then the rule is really the implementation of that policy and how that is implemented in the district on a day-to-day basis. So that's what you'll see with Policy 443 and all the other policies that we'll talk about tonight.
Any questions and concerns about the first one? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next.
Okay, up next then is Policy 443.4, Student Alcohol and Other Drug Abuse and Misuse, and the rule that accompanies that policy. I'm sorry, is that the next one?
Student alcohol and other drug abuse, that's all.
That's right, okay. Trying to lead through my packets here. Any questions with respect to that policy and rule?
There don't appear to be any questions.
Okay, well, and we did discuss these in length when we did the retreat.
Right.
Okay, up next then is 443.6, which is student possession and use of weapons, and the rule with that policy.
Questions or concerns, Brenda?
I think I'm in the policy, yeah. I'm in the policy, and it's 4B. Exceptions to prohibited possession and use. There's in 4B, you have in parentheses, certain equipment and tools. Can we just put a specific example of that? Because when I read that, I'm trying to figure out what certain equipment and tools would be. I mean, I'm assuming it's saws and chisels, knives, and face, those kinds of things. But just to make it clear to people what we're talking about, I think would be helpful. You don't have to list the whole list, but just, a couple of examples would be good.
Okay, we can do that.
Any other questions or concerns on that one?
Okay, and then up next would be 443.7, policy and rule threatening aggressive or violent behavior of students. Any questions?
Questions, comments? We'll move that forward.
Okay. Next is policy and rule 443.8, antisocial association, organization, and activities.
Brenda?
Sorry, I did this a month ago, so I'm trying to remember back, but I just wonder about, when I read through this, I wasn't entirely clear what we meant in terms of, and again, I guess I'm just looking for a specific example to kind of say, oh, that's what that is. And I'm looking at it actually, I think in all A, B, and C. Like, what would be an example of each of those groups and organizations or activities?
Yeah, I think she wants examples.
I mean, the only one I know of with hazing and things like that are fraternities and but I'm not aware of what goes on at high school specifically to those organizations.
Do you have examples?
Let's read it first, sorry.
I know in case law, I've seen this come up with fringe groups that have done abuse of animals as offering up
Okay.
sacrifices of animals, different kinds of,
Are you asking specifically?
Well, I guess I just am surprised that high school, I mean, maybe I'm just naive, but high school kids are involved in things like this, and I'm not aware of specifically what they are. And so I read this and I go, I don't know what that's talking about. So I don't know if there's a way to clarify that for people, or we just...
Within the policy itself, or?
Well, I don't know.
once we start giving examples, that
right.
gets a little dangerous.
Okay.
Gang activity normally falls under the antisocial association, organization, and activities.
All right. Maybe just, maybe not put it in the policy, but
For your understanding?
for my understanding.
Yeah, and I think the origination in the state of Wisconsin for having these in board policy was because of gang activity.
Oh, okay, all right. So there aren't really any other,
And there have been incidents,
But just
not that I'm aware of in Green
okay.
Bay about hazing, but high school athletic teams.
Oh,
did some hazing.
okay.
If I can think of, or even homecoming activities where they took, and this was not in even the state of Wisconsin, but they took like cellophane wrap and wrapped kids to trees and
yeah, oh, okay.
threw mayonnaise
Okay.
on them or something silly.
All right, that's good enough for me, you don't have to, that gives me an understanding where that comes from.
And Brenda, that expulsion digest that I have, because this is one of the basis for an expulsion, it does go through examples in other school districts of this, so if you
Oh,
ever want to look at that, I
Okay,
can...
you have that?
Yep, I
Okay.
have that, if you
All
want
right.
to come in and look at that.
All right, thanks.
Rhonda, does any sort of white supremacy group fall
It
under
would,
that?
yes, it would. I think Katie, Andrew has a question.
Andrew?
And naturally, I would presume a violent, or any kind of blatantly disruptive, violent group obviously from the other side of the political spectrum would be the same thing here, which obviously want to be able to deal with, with extremes when that happens, but a concern that I have is, I get antisocial activities, that's pretty clear, that's your hazing, that's your intimidation, but I'm not so sure what is meant by the act of belonging to or associating with a group that promotes, advocates, or even is indifferent to some of these bad behaviors. That seems to be opening it pretty wide, where I'm saying, right where we're saying, is it an antisocial organization just because it's indifferent to some of these things?
No, it would have to be that is indifferent to the initiations, hazings, intimidations, and/or related activities of the group, which could potentially cause bodily danger, physical harm, or personal degradation or disgrace resulting in physical or mental harm to students.
Oh, okay, so you're talking about a group that may exist and its members might get hazed, but
Right.
that kind of
So
thing?
it's just as a, for instance, if there was a gang, for instance, that maybe they jumped their members in, certain people would basically have a violent hazing initiation. If there was a reported indifference to whether or not that occurred, that would be something that would be looked at in that situation.
Okay, and then I guess too, how do we, what's going to be the consequences to a student who says associates or belongs to? So a student belongs to a group that is anti-social. What does that mean? And I guess what does it mean if someone is a non-practicing member of one of these groups? I mean, it's not like you get a card, membership card and everything?
Yeah.
So if you go to the rule, Andrew,
Yeah.
that talks about the prohibitions on antisocial dress activities and behaviors, and then the consequences for engaging in those behaviors. It's not just simply membership in the organization.
There would have to be some type of disruption.
So it's not enough to just be a member, they have to
Correct.
do something at school that is...
Correct.
Remember, students have free speech rights, so we have to balance all of this with
Right.
students' free
Yes.
speech rights,
Right.
which is a very delicate balance, as you know, but that is something that this policy has to be balanced against.
But that all of these policies would be in the student expectation handbook, that they would be, so parents would have that information.
Right.
Correct.
Be able to
Correct.
understand that with their students.
I have one more question.
Sure.
So the awareness of a group is not in violation, it's an action from the group that's a violation?
It's the dress, because there has been times where students have been wearing, I'll give you one example. It was, I'm going to get the name wrong, something Clown Posse. It's a very violent musical group that sacrifices animals and various different things. That was in violation of this policy. The student was asked to remove that shirt and wear something else. It's the behavior of students that are in these groups that would need to fall under here, and then the grooming or encouraging students to belong to those groups that would need to occur. And this policy really, it was much just reorganization of this. The existing policy really didn't change much in here that already exists.
Connor?
For 1A3 on here, it seems awfully wide and vague to me at least. I'm looking at it, I'm thinking back to the UMAP brochures that came out however long ago that boomed in popularity. It would all be a breaking of that rule. I can't think of what the actual term is. If something like that was to come out now, and it's really just a simple shirt or simple saying like that, but students are getting punished for it, who is the restriction on that? Who do they appeal to? How does that fall under?
So I believe the shirts you're referencing for student dress that has to cause an actual disturbance or a perceived disturbance, and it has to be real and based on a reasonable person standard. So I'm not familiar with the UMAD bro shirts as to what disruption they cause and if students were asked to not wear those. The only clothing I've been called about were the shirts that I just referenced, and there were some, during the election, some questions about the political dress of different individuals, and we weighed students' First Amendment rights and whether it was a perceived or actual disruption, and students were allowed to continue to wear those shirts.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this, on questions? Okay, move that one forward.
Okay, and then the next is 443.9, insubordinate and defiant behavior, and that is just the policy.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, move that forward.
And then we have policy and rule 447.2, detentions and student detention procedures.
Questions, comments? Thank you.
And up next is 447.3, student suspensions, policy and rule.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, move that forward.
I think Grace had a
Sorry,
question.
Grace.
How do you determine, like how, so for 1A,
Are you on the policy or rule, Grace?
the policy, know the rule.
Okay.
For 1A, how does a building administrator determine an inappropriate behavior or delinquent act? Is it their personal opinion, or is that something laid out?
We have a multi-level systems of support guideline that gives them some direction. Each building administrator has some flexibility in how they might interpret an act, but it has to fit within a certain set of parameters. And I believe there's a copy of that guideline on the Pupil Services website if you want to take a look.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll move forward.
And then next we have 447.4 policy and rule regarding student expulsions.
Brenda?
Let's see, it's B, 2B.
Rule policy.
Rule. There's a comment here about that the student or parent can request that the expulsion hearing be closed. And I thought our expulsion hearings were just, were automatically closed.
They are automatically closed. A parent could request them to be in open session, but it's ultimately the board's determination as to whether they be in open or closed session.
Okay. All right. So do we need that in there?
What?
Sorry, I didn't give you enough detail. 2B, D.
The language of B is the language taken straight out of the DPI's notice.
Oh, okay.
So the DPI puts out a standard notice that districts need to include for expulsions, and this is that language straight from the DPI.
Okay, all right. Just seems weird because I don't think we'll require people to request to have it closed.
Correct.
It happens automatically.
We always post it as closed.
Yeah.
Any other?
And then, there's one more too, and again, this is 3, and I'm in probably whatever came below. I'm in a rule, I think, still. 3A. I assume that if a student is not a minor, they can have their parent there. They can, if a student is not a minor, because it says if the student's a minor, they can, with the student's parent or guardian. But I'm assuming that if the student is not a minor, they also can have their parent or guardian.
Correct, yeah.
Do we need to include that? So that it's clear that any student can ask for their parent to be with them?
We can include that.
But that's just saying that the parent must be there if the student's a minor.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Andrew?
Just to, going through this, with the expulsion hearings, I guess I'm in procedures prior to an expulsion hearing. So I'm in B, in the pre-expulsion meeting determination. Is this what's often referred to as a disciplinary hearing, of which there are many, and many of which don't proceed to expulsion?
Correct.
Okay. So am I understanding correctly that when we get to B, so this is where the pre-expulsion meeting, which I'm not gonna, might be worth thinking about it if it's a meeting where most of them don't traditionally lead to an expulsion, but I'm not, just a thought, but, so a behavior happens, the student's suspended, it gets to this meeting, so we have, so there's option number 1, which is that the district may determine that we shouldn't even be here, the student shouldn't have even been suspended. That's rare, but that's a procedural safeguard, and the central office you could just stop it right there. Then looking at between numbers 2 and 3, now number 2 is like an abeyance contract in lieu of an expulsion, and then number 3 is a change of placement without an expulsion. or without reference to an expulsion, or not exactly?
Just give us 1 second.
Okay.
Two is the behavior, two is the behavior contract, this is the advance.
Hearing in advance if the student's behavior more appropriate, make a voluntary commitment to alternative education program. So that's the,
Okay, that's the advance.
holding it in abeyance.
Yep, so 2 is the abeyance agreement, you're correct, Andrew, that in lieu of moving forward with the expulsion, the expulsion is held in abeyance and a contract is entered into. And then paragraph 3 is the behavior contract.
Okay, so 3, so depending on the incident, 2 and 3 are both a change of placement for a period of time, one with the potential expulsion tag to it, and the other one without an expulsion tag to it. Is that correct?
3 could be remaining at their home school with a modification to their programming or schedule and a behavior contract. Those are pretty rare.
Okay, but it does say, so, right, so number 2 has an expulsion here, an expulsion being held in abeyance.
Correct.
And transferred to an alternative program.
Right.
But then 3 also has has transfer of, includes transfer of the student between programs. So one is right, so one, they would, options 2 and 3 might look very similar, but in one case, there's a expulsion held in abeyance attached to it, and the other one's just a voluntary change.
Yeah, Melissa and I were just talking, we should probably flip 2 and 3 around. 3 is the more extreme, the step right before moving to the full board for an expulsion hearing, where there would be a change of placement. Did I say that?
Yeah, 2 is the more extreme.
Yeah, 2 is the more extreme. Where 3, again, the student could remain at their home school under a behavior contract with modified schedule or programming.
Okay, and then there might be a, okay, no, I think it flows better that way.
Okay.
Then I guess there's one more thing that maybe goes right in there where number 1 is you just, number 1 is, why are we even here? We're gonna strike this. There's probably a 1.5 in there somewhere where, you know what, this was pretty serious, but 5 days of suspension is appropriate, and we're not going further, but the suspension was fair. So that maybe needs to be spelled out in there somewhere, but, okay, now I understand, thank you. I think the swapping the 2.
Okay.
Any other question? Brenda?
Darn, this is so hard on electronic copies. 4, we're following, I'm still in the rule, I think. Because it's, yeah, okay. Sorry, let me get there. So it's 4B, 4. This is in the board members during expulsion hearings. And I'm wondering, number 4 says that board members should not introduce personal knowledge of student or situation for the first time during deliberation phase of expulsion. And normally, if we have that kind of, there are situations where board members should recuse themselves from the expulsion hearing. Does that need to be spelled out in this? And then, because I'm concerned that this makes it sound like a board member might have personal knowledge about this student and then is sitting in an expulsion hearing and is not able to be objective. So I don't know if there needs to be some little addition to that, or
We could add, because we do go over that at the expulsion hearing.
Right.
We could add, because sometimes too, you'll have personal knowledge which does not create a conflict for you.
Right.
So I think this is just broad to indicate that even if you have just any personal knowledge, you should not be introducing that. Even if it doesn't create a conflict for you, that wouldn't be appropriate to introduce in the deliberations. But we could add something to the sentence that any personal knowledge that creates a conflict.
Like, what the question you ask us during the hearing, yeah.
Right, that
Just
would be
lift that language out of there and use it there, I think.
Okay, we'll end that.
Andrew?
And then, I know we've talked about this before, but this is the first time it's officially going into policy. So what we've done in the past, and you had mentioned that this was probably not best practice, but we were essentially, we would set conditions for readmittance, and in almost every case, the expulsion was indefinite, but then we were actually ending the expulsion, commuting the sentence, so to speak, at that point, where now readmission hearings will always be a conditional readmittance, and if the board wanted something to truly go off of the record, then the board would have to act to, for example, say that the expulsion would completely end before ninth grade or something. Is that correct?
So the board always has the ability to set the expulsion for any duration that you want. You could set it for one day, or typically it's through the child's 21st birthday. And then underneath that duration of expulsion, you set the time for when the student could be readmitted with conditions. When you readmit the student, let's say it's after 2 semesters of being expelled, then when the student is readmitted after those 2 semesters, the conditions that you've included in your order will carry through the child's 21st birthday. And if the child offends any of those conditions, they can then be re-expelled through their 21st birthday. But you always have the option at the board table in your deliberations to make that expulsion any length you want. It's just typically done through the 21st birthday because these are pretty serious offenses. And when the students are readmitted, we want to make sure that they're continuing to abide by the rules in order to be at school in our school district during that time.
So, but is it legal if a board could later look at someone who, did something very serious when they were 13 years old, opted not to do a time limit on the expulsion, conditionally readmit them after a year, and now it's, now they're going into senior year, and we're talking about something that's now 4 or 5 years ago. Is there a mechanism by which the board could say, now we're okay with the expulsion just being over? Could they meet?
Like expunging the record, essentially?
Expunge the record of expulsion?
Or just say that the expulsion is over now?
I'm not familiar with any process of doing so, because you have issued an order, and that order was voted on and signed by the board. I would have to look into how that order would be undone and then revised. I don't know how that.
Because I felt a little better in one thing under the old system that I did feel a little bit better about is, even if it maybe wasn't the best practice, when people came back, the expulsion was gone.
It was never gone, because under the old system, the difference in how you used to do expulsions before I got here was you just didn't have a timeline for petitioning for readmission. You left that open-ended. But students were always expelled through their 21st birthday, and when they were readmitted, that always stayed on their record. That was never gone.
But they were back, they were admitted, they were re-enrolled.
They were re-enrolled.
And same with what you're doing now. You are just setting a time limit as to when students can apply for readmission and be re-enrolled. But in the past, when we re-enrolled them, we didn't have conditions on it anymore. We had just... The orders did have conditions for readmission.
Okay, but they met them.
There's two parts.
But they have to maintain them.
There's two parts. There is the readmission criteria and then the enrollment criteria once they're allowed back in.
Continuing, so we always
Correct.
had that, it just wasn't spelled out in this format, perhaps.
The orders always had it. It may not have been clear to you based on when they were brought back for readmission.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Makes sense. Any other questions or comments?
Okay, and then the last policy and rule is 447.5, disciplining students with disabilities.
Any questions or comments?
If I can just add, I just want to thank Vicky's team and Claudia's team. We've been working on these policies since June. It's taken a considerable amount of work. They've invested a lot of time in making sure that they're consistent with the MLSS document as well as best practices. We've examined a lot of school districts as well as the WASB model policies to ensure that what the product we brought forward to you tonight was the best that we could do here for our students and for our parents in providing that transparency. So thank you to, I know Claudia's here and to her team as well.
Yes, thank you.
And I would like to echo that as well, as we think forward and want the very best for each and every student. It's very important to have clear policies and rules and things that every student and every staff member can understand and know where things, where the board is at and to move forward. So I appreciate all the work as well, and it's good to have these updated.
And thanks to John and Tom too as well. They provided a lot of help with the policies.
Thank you. All right. That concludes this portion of the work session.
All right, thanks, Katie. Next is organizational support work session. Oh, also, I neglected to do this at the beginning of the meeting. I feel bad, but I just wanted to introduce our new board member tonight, Rhonda Sitnikow, who I know most of you know she was going to be here, but I just want to officially welcome her to the board. Thank you. And then we'll move on to organizational support work session. That will be facilitated by Dr. Wagner.
Thank you. We have no discussion items under business unless there's something you might want to add. Nothing tonight. Human Resources has a couple items. First one being data quality reporting specialist, job description.
Yes, this is a new job description for an individual who currently serves in a role. It will be an upgrade should the board approve it. And as I said in the comments in the update, this individual has taken on a substantial amount of additional responsibilities related to data reporting to the state. And because of the reporting requirements, especially on a 1202 report and other reports, it's become very complex, and the individual is Denise Mitchell-Tree, and she has really stepped up to the plate. So Diane and her team looked at the job description and brought it up to reflect the current duties that she's doing. Diane, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
Sure. Excuse me, I have this one.
As you heard, there are considerations for the trimester schedule as well. Every time there is a change within calendars and a variance within different schedules of schools, this is something else that engages this position, because all the calendars have to be created that are individualized to these different schedules that go on. So as we move down the personalized pathway, we need to reflect that within our student information system. And so this is another thing that is growing as we move forward. The state also has some other things that they're trying to do by organizing teachers using a system called EdFi. So when a teacher moves potentially from one district to the next district, there's a way to keep track of everybody. And because of this transition, it's caused a bit of a lot of troubleshooting on Denise's part to make this work. For smaller school districts, not that big of a thing, but when we've got 22,000 students, those are records and data that we need to make sure is transferring correctly to the places it needs to go. So this position, as Jean has said, has grown and continues to grow as there are more and more data elements that are being used by different systems and organizations that we work with as a school district.
Just to give an example, the Third Friday count, which is certainly connected to aid calculations. To make sure that we have accurate data is so critical to moving us forward, to ensure, for example, that our data that we send is accurate around dropout rates, around early warning system as we think about the dues reporting. One of the things that we know is it becomes even more and more critical because many of these data sets are aligned to report cards and accountability systems. They're related to funding, and so to the expansion of that, and then wrapped in is that student data privacy piece that's very critical. So the job has grown exponentially over these several years, plus summer school has grown. One of the things that Denise was on point for is summer school when it was a small program, and now we're close to 8 to 10,000 students, and it was much smaller when she began. So I think that these are the pieces that we have looked at, and that's the reason that we've upgraded this position and asked the board for approval to move this forward if we can.
Will there be a salary increase also?
Yes, there will be.
Okay, and we'll see that in 2 weeks?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions or concerns? Thank you. We'll move that on.
Okay.
Next is substitute staff rate increases.
We are recommending that we increase our substitute teacher pay from $146 a day to $150 a day, and the substitute support staff from $10 a day to $10 an hour to $11 an hour, and that this be made effective should the board approve that in 2 weeks on November 27th. We need that amount of time to put it in the system, otherwise we do it sooner. The labor market for substitutes, well, for teachers, is becoming one that is very competitive, and substitute teachers are in short supply. You can't really attend any school district HR meeting without a discussion of the quandary we all feel we're in with a lack of substitute teachers. About 3 years ago, we opened up our system to allow teachers with permits, substitute teachers on a permit, to work here. In the past, we said, no, you had to have a teaching license, but that we opened up about 3 years ago. And we're hiring all the subs we can possibly find, but we do think that our rate needs to be competitive, and we feel that this will place us in a position that will be more competitive with other districts. I can't promise that this will correct the sub shortage because we're all competing for the same pool of talented people.
There's another bullet point in here about increasing the pay
yes.
for after the 45th consecutive, or the 20th. Anyway, is that new? Or is that
That's new too.
That concept is new?
We have been paying our long-term subs $190 a day after the 45th day. And when we did a little survey of other districts, we found that many of them are going up to 2 to 3 weeks, or 4 weeks rather. We think after the 20th day will keep us competitive.
Okay.
And at that point, that teacher is really, they're going to meetings with the other staff. They might be doing parent-teacher conferences. They're not just, filling a short gap. And so that's what we feel would be appropriate.
Is this comparable to dollar-wise to our neighboring districts?
It is. We won't be the highest paid, but we will be one of the higher paid districts. And that's kind of what our strategy is. We aren't going to always be the highest paid, but we want to be in the range of what we feel our staff would be willing to feel is competitive. And we've worked with the sub-teachers too, so we have an idea that they would support this.
Who is the highest paid school, like as far as the school district?
Today?
For subs?
Is it Seymour? Might have been. I know, I think it was close. It is close.
Different market, though.
Yeah?
Yeah. Further up.
More competitive.
Some of them structure things differently. So for example, one school district does a rate between 1 and 5 days, then 6 and 20, and then after 21. And so we will be lower when they're at their high. I mean, we'll be higher at their high, and then they're going to be higher in the first part of the work, and that would be Howard Swamico. So it's not apples to apples. Ashwaubenon will be higher than their daily rate, but not as high as their long-term rate. So it varies. So that's why we didn't want to perfectly mirror any one district, but we felt, knowing our staff, we felt that this would be attractive to them.
Any other questions, concerns? I'm delighted that you brought this forward. It's come to my attention visiting buildings lately that about the shortage of subs, and our principals are often asked to fill in. I think that's fine once in a blue moon, but if it's on a regular basis, then that defeats the purpose of why we have an administrator in the building, and they're not available should something arise in another part of the building. I'm also was bothered by the lack of paras, especially if you can picture some of our special education rooms where our paras imperative, that position is there, and we don't have somebody there. That becomes very problematic for many reasons, one of which being safety. I'm also a little bit concerned, Ms. Marsh, and I didn't have a chance to share this with you. I was a little bit bothered by what I heard in one building where a sub-para came and was asked to do something a little bit different than originally was anticipated because they couldn't get the full complement of sub-paras there. And this person refused to do that and left. I have very much of a problem with that in that, where's the sense of responsibility, at least fill in for that day to take care of the interview. Don't want to come back later, but I don't know how people like that are handled when they do those sort of things.
If we're made aware of them, we investigate as we would with any employee and meet with the employee and deal with it, depending on the situation.
Thank you. Any other questions or concerns on this? We'll move forward then. Thank you. That concludes our...
All right, thank you, Chris. So we do have a closed session. I'll read that motion. Closed session has been scheduled for Monday, November 6th, immediately following the adjournment of the work sessions pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851F, considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons except where paragraph B applies, which if discussed in public would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data involved in such problems or investigations, to wit, personnel matters. And pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, investing in public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, more specifically to wit, potential contracts. The meeting will begin in open session to consider the appropriate motion for a closed session so provided by law.
So moved.
Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
Maloney? Troy?
Aye.
Sitnikau? Wagner? Ward?
Aye. Carried 6-0. We will convene across the hall. See you.